Were the pyramids actually pharaohs' tombs? This is a question that over the years has fascinated and divided scholars and researchers. Official archaeology, however, has no doubts these extraordinary structures were designed to house the remains of the rulers of ancient Egypt. But are we really sure that's the case? Today we will take you on an extraordinary journey, and we will be guided by a brilliant independent researcher, Massimiliano Caranzano, an electronic engineer and expert in information technology and artificial intelligence. Caranzano has dedicated years to studying our past, tackling the big questions surrounding ancient civilizations. Author of two fascinating books, Before Us and The Gods of the Flood, his analytical and scientific approach not only challenges official theories, but also offers new, extraordinary perspectives on what we may have forgotten about our past. Before we begin this fascinating journey through time, for those of you who haven't done so yet, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, because it's only with your support that we can continue to investigate and share everything that lies beyond the limits of knowledge. The first question as we begin our journey into the past is this: is the Great Pyramid of Giza really a tomb?
If you build a tomb, it must have the characteristics of a tomb, regardless of when you made it or how you make it. And everyone knows the characteristics of a tomb. People have been to a cemetery, right? When there is a tomb, what's the first thing you find on it? It's the name, right? Otherwise, what kind of tomb is it if you don't put the name on it? And the bigger the family chapel, the more the name is highlighted. There are photographs, inscriptions about what the person did in life. There are memories and so on. And someone with an ego as big as Khufu's, who had a tomb built into the mountain. And you can see it from the moon. He forgot to put his name on it though, but that was so tomb robbers wouldn't find it. Right? Because you can't see the Great Pyramid? I mean, I hear things that make me shiver, you know?
Let's continue our reasoning and use only logic as our tool. Later, we will examine what can undoubtedly be defined as real smoking guns. But for now, let's focus on analyzing the layout of the Great Pyramid. Let's imagine for a moment accepting the hypothesis that the Great Pyramid was actually a burial place. Once you cross the threshold and observe its interior, a series of elements emerge that are, without a doubt, quite unusual.
The first part you do on all fours, going uphill in an ascending tunnel, small, narrow, rough, the whole way. Then, at a certain point, you arrive and you have to claw your way up and pass over an edge to manage to get inside. The Grand Gallery, which all of a sudden is 5 meters high, made with wonderful, incredible architecture, you finally reach the top of this Grand Gallery. If you don't trip, if you don't put your foot in one of the niches, if you don't break a bone by falling, because it's designed for anything but walking inside, let alone carrying a dead body on your shoulders, much less a sarcophagus that weighs several dozen tons. You get to the top and you find a nice step 1/2 meter high, which you have to claw your way up on the pink granite, which doesn't even give you much grip, just to get up. And then you have to squeeze in and lower your head again into an antechamber with supposed sliding doors that keep you out. The thieves. Too bad that when you pull it down, you can go over it, and when you pull it up, you can go under it. So they didn't block anything at all. Then you duck down again and finally enter this chamber where there is nothing. No writing, no glyph, nothing. Here, there's Khufu, the greatest emperor of all time, the greatest pharaoh, the greatest god, whatever you want, nothing at all. Nothing. Not even the mummy, obviously. So excuse me, but have you seen it? An Egyptian tomb made in the same period, I mean not a tomb from 2,000 years later, an Egyptian tomb from 2500 BC. So if it's not the 4th dynasty, it will be the 5th, the 6th, but I mean it's Khufu's cousin. I mean it's full of decorations. It's full of the whole life story of the person who was there. He's buried there. It's colorful. It's full of the pharaoh's objects, to the point that they even buried servants, horses, and everything else inside. That is a tomb. The other one clearly is not a tomb.
Another unusual element inside the Great Pyramid is the presence of granite blocks and structures whose origin and meaning remain enigmatic. These blocks are found in specific places, such as some sections of the roof of the Grand Gallery, or sealing what is believed to be the original entrance of the pyramid. The latter is actually blocked by 3 enormous granite blocks, which, according to archaeologists, were meant to prevent access to the structure. Granite, unlike limestone, which makes up most of the pyramid, is an extremely hard rock and difficult to work with. When Caliph al-Mamun, in the 9th century AD, discovered the entrance to the pyramid apparently by chance, he was forced to dig an alternative passage around these massive blocks of granite, since the softer limestone was much easier to remove. However, the most enigmatic granite structure is the one located above the king's chamber, the so-called relieving chambers. These chambers, not visible to those inside the king's chamber, raise intriguing questions. What role did they have inside the pyramid? Why invest so many resources and face enormous technical difficulties to build such a complex and hidden structure?
Those chambers that an academic archaeologist would tell you are the relieving chambers. I tell you, they are not relieving chambers. I'm an electronic engineer, but it doesn't take much to understand that they are not relieving chambers. First of all, because they don't touch the outer structure, so they don't relieve anything at all. And then especially because the Queen's chamber, which is lower down and has more weight above it, doesn't have those relieving chambers. So it's like you're saying, but I make the foundations with iron reinforcement. From the 4th to 6th floor of the house, but not the first 3, I don't do it. Someone might look at you and say, "Are you crazy?" I wouldn't want to live there. It would collapse on me after 2 minutes.
At this point, it's inevitable to ask why only certain specific structures inside the Great Pyramid were made of granite. If their use wasn't strictly related to structural stability, what could their real purpose have been?
How are these granite structures arranged? In an apparently random way, but random only if you don't pay attention, because in reality, there's nothing random there. Absolutely nothing. Because everything clearly follows a technical specification, meaning whoever built the Great Pyramid had an instruction manual to follow. Literally, it didn't say, build a big pyramid with lots of blocks so it's visible and shows the importance of the pharaoh. No, it was written there. You have to put a block made like this, and that one has to be limestone. The one 10 meters above has to be granite, because if it's not like that, it doesn't work. That was a technological product, and you can tell because it was built according to precise specifications. And I would even say impossible for us because we are not able to make it again. Technological specifications. The problem is understanding what kind of technology it was, and above all, what the function of that system was. It's like if someone found a balance wheel watch 10,000 years from now and realized it was a piece of technology because of the gears, one small, one large, and so on. But then, maybe from there to understanding that it was a watch that's not so obvious. Before you even ask yourself what it was, there are a whole series of questions that should be obvious, like questions such as, why is it so big? No, it wasn't enough to make it 50 meters tall. I mean, if they made it 140 meters tall and used 6 million blocks, I mean, they built something that weighs several million tons. Either they were idiots, and since they actually built it, it's clear they weren't. Or maybe making it that big was part of the specifications for that technological product. It had to be huge. Like that.
Actually, the geometry of the pyramid has some peculiarities that are undoubtedly puzzling. For example, the total length of the base compared to the height of the pyramid is closely related to the ratio between the circumference of the Earth and its radius. The square base of the pyramid has a total length that is a scaled representation of the Earth's circumference at the equator, and the height would represent a relationship between the Earth's radius and its circumference. The Great Pyramid of Giza would reflect the proportions of the Earth on a scale of 1 to 43,200. And this, moreover, might not be a random number, because 43,200 is a significant number in ancient numerical traditions.
Are you telling me it's just a coincidence? Are you telling me that if they made the tomb with proportions of 1 to 44,000, it wouldn't have been good enough? It still wouldn't have been the tomb of the great Khufu? It was exactly 1 to 43,200, which is also a precessional number, by the way, because it's aligned with incredible precision to the current celestial poles. Are you telling me it's a coincidence? Why are the chambers inside made like that? Why is there what you call djed above the sarcophagus? There are these relieving chambers, but why are those relieving chambers polished underneath and not polished on top? If you try to answer and put a few more things together, you'll understand. It's like someone who has this watch. He starts to see there are two hands, wonders what these two hands did, and starts making hypotheses. Let's say they pointed to the stars. Then he sees some numbers and says, maybe they were a time indicator. And slowly he goes back and says, this was a watch, and here it's the same. It's something you can understand. The first thing you understand is the physics behind that technological product. It was a kind of physics that somehow had to do with resonances. It somehow had to do with vibrations. And this already explains a lot of things. For example, the materials used. The pink granite used in certain places has resonant properties. So much so that even today we use it in high-tech devices. That is, when you have a quartz watch on your wrist, basically there's a piece of quartz which is contained in granite inside the watch. By resonating, it gives the tick, tick, tick that used to be made by the spring. That one is made on a slightly larger scale, so you can already see that you start to understand different things, like the proportions with the planet, for example, and the sizes. Well, in short, these vibrations, where did they come from? These vibrations that activated these vibrations that set this technological product in motion. Who was giving them to an object weighing 6 million tons? I think the planet gave them to it. That's why it's the proportions of the planet. If you have two tuning forks and one is tuned to A and one is tuned to C, when you strike the one on A, the one on C doesn't vibrate because they don't have the same proportions. They're not tuned to the same note. If you have two tuning forks, one bigger and one smaller, but both tuned to A, when one vibrates, the other will also vibrate at a distance. That thing comes to my mind. There, the vibration was taken from the movement of the planet. That's why it has the proportions of the planet, and probably that's why it's aligned with the celestial poles of the planet, not the magnetic ones. So, to the axis of rotation, you see, if it's not aligned, it doesn't work.
Is it possible? Confirmation of this hypothesis comes from an interesting scientific study conducted by the Department of Nanophotonics and Metamaterials at the University of St. Petersburg in collaboration with the Laser Zentrum Hanover, and it was published in the prestigious Journal of Applied Physics. In fact, the research has shown how the pyramid interacts with electromagnetic waves and, under resonance conditions, is able to concentrate electromagnetic energy both in its internal chambers and at the tip of the pyramid. Pyramid conditions.
So that shape is a bit like the prism, which was the idea that first came to my mind. The prism, the one that splits light into many colors, splits it. Because with that shape, if you use a glass parallel pipe, it doesn't split it. It has to be a prism. And in the same way, It's the pyramid that apparently is able to concentrate in certain points, coincidentally in the king's chamber and coincidentally at the tip. Electromagnetic radiation is involved. You see, you're starting to support this, let's say, idea that it's a technological product, and you've also started to understand a bit more it's a technological product. It has to do with waves, whether they're seismic, vibrational, or electromagnetic waves. It doesn't really matter. There's still variations, let's say, of a physical quantity, an electromagnetic field, or a vibration of the ground, seismic, harmonics, with certain characteristics, with certain frequencies. And so from there, you start to hypothesize a few things. You start to say, what if it takes advantage of the piezoelectric effect, for example, meaning the effect where if you make a piece of granite containing quartz vibrate, it generates electricity. And what if it was something like this? And what if it was about concentrating it at the tip and emitted this form of energy that could then be used? Maybe throughout the whole Giza plateau, because we have to look at the Giza plateau as blocks, individual monuments, and not as we would look at it today. A, the power plant in the city, the transformer groups, the lines that power the fridge at home, the microwave at home, which then use energy. Why do we have to be so limited?
So let's suppose that the Great Pyramid, but also the entire Giza complex, is actually an expression of advanced technology. It's natural to wonder why we haven't found clear evidence proving the use of this advanced technology. But are we really sure that this statement is correct? Even in this case, that's not how things are. The evidence exists and is clearly present. But to fully understand their significance and to see how these discoveries, which we will discuss shortly, represent indisputable proof of a technology unknown to us, we need to explain what the Mohs scale is, that is, the scale used to determine the hardness of a material.
A material is assigned a number on a scale from 1 to 10, which is a hardness coefficient, where 10 is diamond, which is the hardest thing of all, and 1 is talc, for example, which is very, very soft. Now, first of all, please keep in mind that this is not a linear scale. So the difference in hardness from 2 to 3 is not the same as the difference in hardness between 9 and 10. Between 9 and 10, there's a galaxy in between, meaning 10 is more than twice as hard as 9, while 2 and 3 are more or less the same hardness. Just to be clear, marble, like Carrara marble, which we think is something very hard, is around 3. Okay, steel is around 5, copper is around 3 to 4, about 3.5. This scale tells us that anything at a certain Mohs number can only be scratched by materials with a higher number. So to work with, marble, you have to use something that's a higher level, for example, copper. You can work it, but it's already difficult because it's very close to steel and iron. You can already work it well because that's how it is. You have a Mohs 3 for marble against a hardness of 5.5 for steel. Okay. Geology science. So if you're an Egyptologist, you can't say that the granite, which is normally at Mohs 7, was worked by the Egyptians with copper. Why isn't it possible to do that? I mean, geology as a science rules this out. Of course, if you use 100,000 chisels, you can chip away at it, meaning you wear down the granite bit by bit. But you can't make precise cuts or perfect holes. Today, if we wanted to try to cut that rock, not like butter, we would have to use something like topaz, corundum, or diamond. In fact, to cut a slab of granite, we use diamond blades. So this is science, this is our technology. Now, if we then go and look at what they left us, I'm sorry, but these things have absolutely nothing to do with it. Here we are in Karnak, for example. I mean, they made things like this. For example, this is a hole, by the way, a perfectly shaped hole made in pink granite. Can you explain how they managed to make these things? Then I'll show you some details. This one is about 35 centimeters in diameter, but let me show you a detail where the blade ended. You see where this person's finger is, it shows where the blade or the energy beam was. We don't know what they used. You can see it. The size, I mean, we don't have it. A diamond wheel that's thinner than a pin and can cut granite. You understand, we don't have this technology and they had it. You have the proof right here in front of you that they had it. Rack your brains. Explain to us how they managed to do it. This is the famous artifact number 7, analyzed by Sir Flinders Petrie. No, I mean these artifacts are conical. So can you explain to me how a core drill that screws in there can change its diameter as it goes down? I mean, it's invalid, it's been discussed, it's been evaluated. Sardinia case, and why wasn't this looked into further? We were a bit strict and we, well, in the direction, used to say, do these things, and they managed to do them. We have it here, right in front of our eyes. In short, they are absolutely indisputable. Look at what they were doing. I mean, this is the kind of work they did in pink granite. We wouldn't even be able to make those 2 holes over there because we wouldn't be able to set up the core drill, which has to be bolted to the granite block in order to do that coring. And these are things done on a small scale. Here, for example, we moved to South America. Here you can see how they did the work. There's this piece of diorite. It's not cut with a copper chisel. You can see it, the mark of, I would say, the diamond wire they used to cut it. So these are pieces of evidence. Then, after that, the fact is that you'll never see any of the academics talking about these things on mainstream shows like Nova or things like that. It's pretty obvious. Because if they show you this, anyone would say, but you can't do this with a chisel, or you can't do these things with a wire, right? Why can't you make a curved cut in the rock? With a wire, you understand, as the wire moves back and forth, it wouldn't cut down this way. So how do you work diorite like this with such a small neck where you can't even fit your hand? And above all, how do you make it? It's so thin inside that when you turn on a light inside, it's transparent. We can't do these things today, and there are plenty of them. I could go on for hours showing you these things, then I could go on for hours showing you mine. It's a girl's, and nothing had a cut like theirs yet. In short, this advanced civilization made a perfect cut in the granite, polished, while the Egyptians' desperate attempts to work this granite to make a doorstop. At some point, they gave up because after digging for 2 generations, they decided they couldn't do it and abandoned it. There. The logic of the child and of an elementary student is very simple. It says, but excuse me, if they did that and cut it like that with the lightsaber, why didn't they use the lightsaber again to cut the piece in the middle? And the answer is very simple, because they weren't the ones who did it.
But it's not just the technology used to make the cuts or carve the massive granite blocks that is inexplicable. The traces visible on the surface of the material suggest that the rock was in an unusual state, almost plastic, or softer than its normal solid condition, as if it were temporarily malleable. And there is also extraordinary evidence emerging about this phenomenon.
Here we are at the Great Obelisk, where you can clearly see how they scooped out this granite. You can see very well that this wasn't carved with a chisel. You can see that it was scooped out. These are like the scoops you make in butter, in a stick of butter with a hot spoon. You make these marks here, and you see these things on Easter Island. You see them everywhere. So basically, if you go there and keep your eyes open, when they tell you, yes, they made it with diorite balls or they made it with chisels, you can say, look, definitely not. Then you go see the pyramid of Mycerinos. And again, you see the work done halfway because you can see how they made this outer casing. They did it roughly, putting down the stones all rounded and curved like that. First question I ask is, but when you extract a block of granite from the quarry, you don't extract it already rounded like that, do you? It doesn't come out already rounded like that, does it? It comes out all chipped or all squared off. How can you extract a stone from a granite quarry that's all rounded? Like that? So they laid down these rounded stones, which are anything but chipped, etc., and they fit together perfectly. And then they planed the top and polished them, as you can see here in the image on the right, and finished them. You can see very well, these are the photos I took myself. You can see it very clearly. By the way, it's not like they took off a whole centimeter to smooth it out and make everything look good, right? They laid them so roughly that they had to remove 4.05 centimeters of granite. How did they remove it? And I'll tell you, how did they remove it? With an extremely simple technology, because otherwise they would have laid the stones much better if it had been difficult for them to smooth them. Do you understand? They would have made them fit together much better, so they wouldn't have had to sand away 40 centimeters of granite. But instead, they did it this way. Because they had the shamir, they managed it with ease.
You can see it very clearly.
With an incredible ease, they were able to level them. You can see it here. Now that I'm getting closer, then I'll put my hand on it. I mean, you can clearly see that it has nothing to do with what they tell you about chisels, balls, diorite, and so on. We're talking about a technology unknown to us. Period. That's it.
You can see it very clearly, too. Now, how much material did they remove?
Do you see it? This stone that's here. Now I'll highlight it for you. This stone here shows you it clearly fell from up there, right? It shows you. Because all these stones are rounded in shape because they're all bulged out. They're all rounded like this. Because when they placed this stone up there, it was soft. This stone. In fact, the base where it rested, the one on top, settled and became flat and fit perfectly. That's why these walls fit together so perfectly that you can't even fit a pin between them. Because it's as if when you build them, it was cement, it was mud, so you put it on top, it settles perfectly. Obviously, the front part, where there was nothing holding it in place, remained bulged out, round, and it's solidified. So then, with the same technology, probably by softening it again, like someone who does plaster work would do, they smoothed it and polished it. That's what logic says based on the evidence in the field. So starting from the evidence in the field means using the scientific method. I mean, this thing here made with a carnelian ring, you do it with a copper chisel. This thing here, this is between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale. Guys, don't you want to see the technology? Because it's right in front of our eyes.
Joseph Davidovits, a French chemist, has proposed a revolutionary hypothesis. According to this theory, many blocks of the Egyptian pyramids, especially the limestone ones, were not simply quarried and carved, but made directly on site, using a kind of ancient concrete or geopolymer. This material would have been produced by mixing crushed limestone with clay, ash, and a chemical binder, and then poured into molds that shaped the blocks. This fascinating and innovative theory could offer an explanation for the construction of some of the most enigmatic artifacts of antiquity. When we closely observe the details and complexity of these structures, the geopolymer hypothesis does not seem sufficient to clarify the sophisticated construction techniques and the level of precision achieved by civilizations of the past.
If we take South America, where the issue is the same, that is, this is carved into the mountain, you understand, so you should... Are you telling me that the mountain is a geopolymer? I mean, it's not like they took a piece of the mountain and shaped it? No, the shapes are made in the bedrock of the mountain. Around Sacsayhuaman, there are entire rocky outcrops, all cut and sliced, like you would cut and shape modeling clay. And clearly they're not a geopolymer because that's an extrusion of bedrock that comes out from underground. So the theory of geopolymers, which I don't dispute, but it doesn't explain anything at all, I mean with the geopolymer, you might just be able to explain one of the limestone blocks of the pyramid. Limestone, not granite?
To truly understand the mastery of the ancient Egyptians, we have to go beyond Giza and turn our gaze to Saqqara, a place that holds some of the most fascinating secrets of ancient Egypt. Located about 30 kilometers south of Cairo, Saqqara lies on the desert plateau of the west bank of the Nile, near modern Mitrahina, in the heart of the ancient capital of Memphis. In Saqqara stands the step pyramid of Pharaoh Djoser, an architectural masterpiece attributed to the brilliant Imhotep and considered the first pyramid ever built. But Saqqara is not just this. There is another monument that fascinates and intrigues at the same time, the Serapeum. This extraordinary underground complex, according to traditional archaeology, was dedicated to the worship of the god Apis, represented as a sacred bull. In the Serapeum, enormous granite sarcophagi were found, which are said to have contained the mummified remains of the sacred bulls. However, as with the Great Pyramid, this interpretation also raises more questions than answers. The Serapeum tells a story that is divided into two eras. The oldest part, known as the Grand Gallery, is the one that stands out the most for its precision and grandeur. The colossal granite sarcophagi, each weighing dozens of tons, show such sophisticated workmanship that it seems impossible to attribute it to the technology of that era. On the contrary, the more recent part, made up of smaller galleries, is less elaborate, so much so that today it appears in a state of ruin. It is right here that the wooden sarcophagi, funerary goods, and the mummies of the Apis bulls were found. The Serapeum was discovered in 1850 by the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, a central figure in Egyptology. When he explored the oldest part, he found 24 granite sarcophagi. Almost all of them were half open and empty, while 2 were out of place. One, still sealed, was opened using explosives which damaged it, but nothing was found inside. In the more modern part, however, Mariette found mummies and funerary goods. According to the official theory, the oldest part was looted in ancient times, and that's why neither mummified bulls nor funerary goods were found there. But this explanation is puzzling. Why would the looters have left the more recent part untouched, where there were valuable objects and mummies? Moreover, there is evidence suggesting that at the time of its discovery, the Serapeum had remained untouched for millennia, making the looting hypothesis even more uncertain. From this initial reconstruction of the events, we can see that there are several elements that are not clear. But let's apply the same method we used for the Great Pyramid, and before going into details, let's analyze the structure of the Serapeum.
This is the layout as Auguste Mariette drew it when he arrived back then. You enter from here, this is the little entrance, and then, well, they made this tunnel here, they made some boxes, some alcoves placed here, and then suddenly they made a really strange one here, shaped like this. I mean, these are things that I find not very logical. I mean, it's like if you build a house with a main hallway and you have the 4 rooms of the house that you access from the main hallway, and then for the bathroom you make a 20-meter long corridor for no apparent reason, and then at the end it makes an L shape to enter the bathroom. When someone enters this house, they notice this thing and say, but why? Excuse me, who was the architect who made this for you? Unless there's a functional reason, unless that's a technical requirement of what is clearly, even more so than the Great Pyramid, a technological device. And you notice a lot of these things. Why make a second corridor here when you had already made one here? Did you really enjoy digging underground in the rock that much? Why make this second corridor, and why space out these other boxes by digging a 10-meter corridor when you could have easily made them here, as it would have been logical to do, right? Why make them all here like this, and why tilt this one like that? This, for example, in electronics or in physics, because then if the quantity you're considering is an electromagnetic field, a current or a voltage, it's electronics. If the quantity you're considering is a vibration wave, for example, an air wave that compresses and expands, well, the principle is the same. Well, this object you see here is called a loop, it's called a closed loop, and it's exactly what you do in electronics or acoustics to create a resonance. And it's exactly the same kind of principle that I have seen, in my personal opinion, in the Great Pyramid. And that's the reason why, at the bottom of the descending passage, there are 3 huge plugs made of pink granite. They weren't there to stop tomb robbers from getting in. They were there to create resonance inside the machine, the Great Pyramid. I've found the same thing here. These are the tunnels dug by the Egyptians, the ones that the gang of Egyptologists want us to believe are the same people who actually made these things here.
One thing that immediately stands out when looking at these sarcophagi is the massive size of their lids, which are estimated to weigh around 20 tons, equivalent to about 13 average cars. But what was the purpose of such massive lids? Why did they need to be so incredibly heavy?
These bulls they put inside, by the way, dead and mummified. But they kicked so much that if you didn't put such a heavy lid on, they'd get out. Because the lids are so heavy that we can't move them. So, if those who made this thing, who clearly had great muscles, otherwise they couldn't have done it, they did it like this. The lid is heavy because it obviously had to be heavy, otherwise something wouldn't have worked right. So the second question is, well, what if you have to make it heavy? I would say it's because it had to contain something inside that box that otherwise would tend to come out. I'm not saying a monster, an alien or something like that, for example. A force, right? A sort of pressure developed inside, a kind of force that if the lid wasn't so heavy, it would have blown everything open and, in my opinion, would have stopped the device from working. Not by chance, Auguste Mariette, when he entered the various sarcophagi, found nicely stacked stones inside them, almost as if they had added extra weight because, well, maybe it was an additional safety measure, a guarantee.
The enormous size of these lids recalls the study conducted by the British aerospace engineer Christopher Dunn, who, after a series of precise measurements, found that the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid showed clear signs of expansion. The cracks on the walls were the first clue that led him to examine the room more closely, leading him to discover that the walls seemed to have deformed, as if a powerful internal force had acted on the structure, causing the damage. This apparently inexplicable phenomenon raises an intriguing question. Is there a connection between these anomalies and the gigantic lids of the sarcophagi found in the Serapeum of Saqqara?
This is the smoking gun. This is a box that is enclosed. It's not accessible. I only have some pictures. It's a wonderful box because it's huge. You can see the person next to it. This box was placed there in the corner because they discarded it. Because it's broken. You see it has this crack. Now, if these were really the coffins of the Apis bulls, and you hollow it out for 8 generations with the diorite ball to make this sarcophagus, and then you get this little crack at the end. I mean, you don't just throw this thing away. You patch it up a bit, okay? And that's fine. That's good enough. It's not like if you make a mistake drilling a hole to put in the last bathroom accessory, you call the tiler, remove all the tiles, and start over, okay? You try to cover up that hole somehow, and that's good enough. No, they discarded it because they discarded it. I'll tell you why they discarded it. Because it didn't work anymore? Because it had a crack? Because if a violin gets a crack, it's not enough to just fill it in. That violin won't play anymore. It can't be tuned anymore.
A particularly curious detail emerges from observing these extraordinary sarcophagi. Looking at them closely, you notice that the outside of the sarcophagi appears rather roughly finished, while the inside reveals workmanship of surprising, almost impossible precision. By observing the inside of one of these sarcophagi, we can see perfectly clean cuts, precise angles down to the millimeter, going all the way to the bottom without the slightest irregularity. This quality of workmanship not only seems unachievable with the traditional tools of the time, like copper tips and abrasive sand, but it also represents a challenge, even for modern technology. Even today, to achieve such a level of precision, specialized tools would be needed, specifically designed to create those flawless angles and surfaces. Another impressive detail is that, once the lid is placed, the sarcophagus closes hermetically, with such precision that the lid and base fit together perfectly, creating a watertight seal. This raises an intriguing question. If these sarcophagi were meant to be tombs for the Apis bulls, why is the interior finished with such extreme care, while the exterior is much rougher? This workmanship only makes sense if we accept that it is not a tomb but something else. Something that required a perfect interior and an exterior that didn't need any particular aesthetic attention. To all this, another incredible element is added. The work on the sarcophagi was not done in the open air, but directly underground. We know this thanks to the discovery of several incomplete sarcophagi inside the Serapeum. This shows that they were transported into the galleries still rough and then finished on site. But here arises another question. How were they able to carry out such precise work in galleries without adequate lighting systems and without any ventilation?
We wouldn't be able to work on them inside with our technology because if you use a diamond grinder in a dusty enclosed place without light and so on, after a minute you'd be suffocating in the sand, or you'd have cut your hand because you can't see anything. But if, for example, as the Jewish Midrash of the Talmud tells us, and says that Moses, using the shamir, he engraved the extremely hard, precious stones of the sacred breastplate. And when he engraved them with the shamir made no noise and did not produce any waste material. So you understand that if they have a technology that engraves easily and does not produce any waste material, so it's not a technology that uses brute force, it's not an abrasive technology. And so it probably doesn't create dust, it doesn't create any difficulties, and so you can also work where work has already been done, so down there in the tunnels.
Just like in Giza, in this case too, there are concrete elements that not only suggest the use of a technology unknown to us, but we have a series of clues that make us believe that these ancient people were able to manipulate matter to make it workable, in ways we don't know but that we can guess thanks to observation.
This is beautiful. It's the most beautiful of all, because here you can really see that this rock, when it was worked, was in a metamorphic semi-solid state. You can see it very well because look here, the edge has collapsed. You see, the line of the edge has collapsed, like when you melt a piece of plastic. By the way, when you're there, you notice that even in these cracks, in what look like chips or dents, it's polished even on the inside. Who would take it upon themselves, especially who would bother to polish the inside of a dent? You see, these dents, these ones you see here, they're all polished. Why? Because the polishing wasn't done mechanically. It was something, I would say, energetic that changed the physical and chemical characteristics of the material. In this case, the stone. Here, you can clearly see that it wasn't a geopolymer. You see the natural veins of the rock. I mean, if you make a geopolymer, you don't make it with these things here. But there are so many of these examples. Look, I'll show you another one, less known. Here we are on the Giza plateau, God only knows where. Probably this piece of rock is already covered by meters of sand. No, luckily there are pictures. Do you see this image? Well, this is already interesting because how do you make this hole in this light white granite with a copper object. It's already interesting, but it's not the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing in this image is here. Here. Whoever made the hole made a mistake. You can even see the double. No, they made the hole here first. And the tool had already slipped because they made another mark here. Then they said, oh, damn, I shouldn't have done it in this corner. I should have done it in the other corner below. So he applied the shamir for a second and patched it up a bit.
Examples of extraordinary workmanship, like those observed in Egypt, are not found only along the Nile. Moving to the other side of the world, specifically to Peru, in the city of Cusco, we can admire the Temple of the Sun, known as Coricancha, one of the most famous and impressive archaeological sites of the ancient Inca civilization. Here too we find megalithic walls, made mainly of andesite or diorite, materials that are notoriously hard and difficult to work with. Despite this, these stones have been perfectly polished and their corners are incredibly precise, leaving you speechless.
This is even more amazing because here you can actually see the fingerprint they left. You can see it really clearly. I mean, here you can clearly see that this rock was soft because when someone pressed their finger here, the material they removed from there accumulated in this ridge here. Just like you would if you put a finger in a cake with cream, or a finger in a wet brick, or in wet cement. There are things like this everywhere. You go to take a ride on the camel or to listen to the nonsense the guide tells you. Then, if she's a bit sharp, when she turns off the camera, she says, "But if I say something different, they'll fire me." Well, anyway, I don't need to tell you. You can see these things yourself.
At this point, it's inevitable to wonder who this ancient civilization was that possessed such advanced and mysterious technology capable of building such extraordinary structures. Furthermore, one wonders if this civilization left traces that could help us understand its origin and legacy. Staying in Egypt, a significant clue might be found in Edfu, along the western bank of the Nile, in the heart of Upper Egypt. Here stands a splendid temple dedicated to the god Horus, the falcon god, one of the most important deities worshipped in the Egyptian pantheon. This temple, with its inscriptions and its myths, might hold fragments of a more ancient and profound story, bringing us closer to a greater understanding of this enigmatic culture.
It is a relatively young temple from the Ptolemaic era, so we are in the 3rd century BC, but it is a temple that, as the texts of Edfu themselves tell us, was built on top of another temple, which was built on top of another temple, which was built on top of yet another temple. Because it was customary to build certain types of sacred monuments, always in the same place, because that was a place that had been indicated by the primeval gods, so by the primordial gods. On the inner walls of the Temple of Edfu, the most important parts of a cosmogony are engraved in hieroglyphs on the walls. So a story, let's say, of the genesis of Egyptian civilization. These were copied when they built that temple. So we're talking about the Ptolemaic period, which is actually a very recent era from books that would probably be lost by now. So rather than lose them, they wrote them there. It comes to my mind that we are around the time, now we would need to check, of the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. So maybe that has something to do with it as well. So Plato's books, the ones that Sonchis promised to show to Solon, were definitely in the Library of Alexandria, or at least they were in a temple or in a priestly structure at Sais, near Alexandria. What is written in these Edfu texts? It says that the primeval gods, so the founders of Egypt, came to Egypt from an island located to the west, in the ocean. The island of the gods, where the first civilization was born, an island that had created colonies all over the world, including Egypt. So Egypt was a colony of this island, of this civilization of the gods, of this island in the middle of the Atlantic, and this island was destroyed in a great cataclysm of weapons. And the survivors, the surviving deities of this cataclysm that destroyed the island of the gods, returned to the Egyptian colony, which had been spared from this cataclysm, something that Sanchez also tells us in the Timaeus, to rebuild the world that had been destroyed. When they arrived in those parts, they arrived exactly at the end of the Younger Dryas. So after the great cosmic cataclysm that destroyed the civilization that existed before us. So what is written in the texts of Edfu? In the texts of Edfu, it is written that Egypt was an Atlantean colony of Atlantis, which is also written in the Timaeus. And it is written that Egyptian civilization was refounded by the Atlantean survivors, who, after the cataclysm, returned under the leadership of Thoth to the Egyptian plain and dictated the rules for the civilization that needed to be rebuilt. They identified where to build the sacred monuments, which they called the primeval mounds, and among these primeval mounds, among these primordial mounds, there was one that was called the Great Mound, and it was on the banks of a great river. Who knows what this great mound on the banks of a great river was? The texts of Edfu also mention technology. There is a clear reference to Atlantean technology, and that reference has a link. It has a very solid, direct line that connects it to the technology I told you about of the Great Pyramid. They called it the Eye of Sound. Today we call it the Eye of Horus, but it's the same thing. The origin of the Eye of Horus symbol is called Aulin, and it's a sacred Mesoamerican symbol that means movement, vibration. The Word was with God, and God was the Word, the sacred sound of Om. In all religions, it is said that vibration is the physics of the Creator.
But this is another fascinating story that will take us to a remote and forgotten era. And thanks to the work of Massimiliano Caranzano, we will have the opportunity to explore it further in an upcoming unmissable video that we are sure will capture your interest. Having reached the end of this exciting journey, we are really curious to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments what you think. In the video description, you will find all the links to explore Massimiliano Caranzano's research in more depth. And if you haven't already, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to not miss the upcoming videos. See you in the next story.